Good afternoon, everyone. It is 2 o'clock. My name is Melanie Martin, and I am with the Hawaii Department of Transportation Office of Civil Rights. Thank you for attending today's DBE training on our new forms. And with that, I am going to turn off my camera because I have bad internet quality, but I just wanted to introduce myself to you guys. So can you guys all see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program and how the requirements have changed recently. Before I get started on all of the new changes that are exciting, I wanted to briefly explain the history of the DBE program in terms of contract goals that we are now setting and why it is so different from yesteryear. Way back in the day when I first started nearly years ago, we didn't have any goals on our program or our DBE project, our federal aid projects. We only had what we call a race neutral overall DBE goal. And that meant that for each project, there was a non-specified goal. And the prime contractors who were bidding on these projects were encouraged to use DBEs. And at that time, when I first started, it was a 17% overall goal. And guess what? We could meet that goal easily. And that was because there were a few DBEs that were quite large and could subcontract under the prime contractors. Well, one of those subcontractors got bought out by one of the big guys that's probably on this call. And that DBE participation kind of dwindled. DOT was actually not forced to, but asked by the operating administrations, namely Federal Highway Administration, Federal Aviation Administration, and Federal Transit Administration to go ahead and implement what they call race conscious goals, which means setting contract goals on our federal aid projects. So throughout the years, we've been setting contract goals for DBEs, and for those of you who have been around for a while, it was called underutilized DBEs for a period of time. I am sure you're glad we don't have underutilized DBE goals anymore, but we're now back to DBE goals. And we are trying to meet our overall goal of 17.26%, utilizing these DBE contract goals. So with that said, let's just dive into this. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the changes to the proposal pages in our DOT bid specifications. Pages P5 and P6, which are the subcontractor listing and joint contractor listing, have changed. You'll notice that the column to indicate whether or not that subcontractor is a DBE is no longer there, and I have a picture of that, so we're going to go over that. We're going to talk about the Dbe requirements, or the special provisions, also known as the contract provisions. It's like a 15-page document with all of the Dbe requirements. Somebody's mic is hot. And then after we go over the special provisions, we're going to talk a little bit about the Dbe forms that are newly created, in particular confirmation and commitment agreement form, contract goal verification, and documentation of good faith efforts form. After we talk about the forms, I'm going to speak to the good faith efforts requirement, as well as the online payment tracking system requirement, also known as contract compliance. Wow, that was a lot. And who scheduled this training for 2 o'clock in the afternoon when everybody's sleepy? Oh my goodness, it was Melanie. I'm very sorry. But anyway, here we go. First of all, we're going to talk about the subcontractor listing and joint contractor listing, which is the pages P5 and P6. I want you to note here, the takeaway for this particular slide is that this requirement is not a DBE requirement. It is a Hawaii Revised Statute 103D 302 requirement, which requires bidders to list their subcontractors and joint contractors. Recently, the Highways Division within DOT updated Section 101 of their specifications to revise the definition of contractor, and I'm not going to read it because it's right here on the slide. Important to note in that definition is these companies that you, as the bidder, is claiming to be your subcontractor, they must meet this definition and be listed here. So they're either licensed or required to be licensed under Chapter 444. That's the professional and vocational licensing chapters of DCCA. And very important to note because there are certain exemptions, there are certain nuances between federal aid projects and state projects with respect to what subcontractor or joint contractor needs to be licensed at the time of bid. Okay, so please do your homework, look up Chapter 444 of HRS or Chapter 77 of Hawaii Administrative Rules to make sure you understand what the licensing requirements are for municipal projects, as well as what the definition of a subcontractor is per our specifications. Okay, so be sure that when you list these subcontractors and joint contractors, you list their scope of work, and those subcontractors, each of these subcontractors, their scopes of work must be distinct and separate. And let me explain why. The whole reason behind this HRS 103D listing requirement is to prevent bid shopping. So you cannot have a subcontractor doing the same scope of work. They must be separate and distinct. This is to prevent bid shopping. So I'm not going to go into that because I'm sure you all know what bid shopping is. And by the way, if you have any questions, Karen Awana and Dan Williams are here from the Dbe program and they're monitoring the chat. So go ahead and type it in the chat. I don't mind if you unmute yourself to ask a question, but if you're eating, then mute yourself. I'm just kidding.
No questions in the chat right now. Thank you, Melanie.
Karen. Oh, I told my staff I'm going to be serious and then, okay. So anyway, I am serious. Here on this slide, are pictures or snapshots or screenshots of the two forms, the 2 pages that I just spoke of. Notice that DBE column is missing. No longer will you indicate whether or not the companies listed on these pages are DBE or not DBE. Do not use these forms to indicate your dollar amounts for your subcontractors. Please be sure when you explain the nature of work, they are separate and distinct. And you're going to ask me, well, what's that in the note at the bottom? The print is so small. No worries, because I put it here on this next slide. And it's very important for you to know what this says, because like I said, it has to be, the subcontractors have to be distinguished from one another. Have to be, the nature and scope of work have to be unique and unambiguous. The project engineers that put out the solicitation, they will be reviewing your bids and they will evaluate your subcontractors in accordance with Chapter 444. This is all, these pages or the proposal is due at the time of bid opening as a matter of responsiveness. Does anybody have any questions about that? If not, we're going to move on. Here is where we're going to talk about the different changes to the Dbe program and the Dbe requirements, as well as the new forms. The Dbe Special Provisions is also known as the Dbe Contract Provisions and the Dbe Requirements. It's 15 pages long, and please be sure to read this document if this is a federal aid project, or it will be in the federal aid bid package, but please be sure to read this section. What's in it? First of all, it has all of the Dbe assurances, which is your contract language to ensure that you will not discriminate against DBEs based on race, color, sex, national origin, and also that you understand the requirements, that you will comply with these requirements. It also goes over what your responsibilities are as a bidder. You must register with the Office of Civil Rights. If you have done so already, you do not need to do it for every project. But if there are changes to your organization or the contact information, please submit another form and update that information. The special provisions also goes over certified DBEs, what's required, and they must be certified in the type of work that you are saying they will perform on your project. The document also covers the new forms, which we're going to go over, but it basically talks about the confirmation and commitment agreement, the DBE contract goal verification, and good faith efforts documentation form. The special provisions also informs you how to calculate your contract goal and what we will not include for DBE participation, namely mobilization, force accounts, and allowance items. Okay, so that language has been added, and we'll show you in the DBE requirements form after this slide deck where that's written. The document also goes over good faith efforts, the administrative reconsideration process. If the department has determined you have not met your goal and have not demonstrated good faith efforts, you as the bidder may request an administrative reconsideration. So the DBE requirements document goes over all of that, as well as it covers the online payment tracking system, which is where we are monitoring prompt payment to both DBE and non-DBE subcontractor suppliers, etc. Sorry about my dogs. Okay, so the first form is the confirmation and commitment agreement. You see that it's an S because there are two versions of this form. The first one is for subcontractors, manufacturers, and suppliers. And there is another form for trucking companies. And the reason why we have a separate form for trucking companies is because there are additional questions asked, such as the number of trucks to be used, type of trucks, whether or not they're going to be leased by another firm, etc. And that's why. Remember how I said in the beginning, pages and the section 101 of highways specifications, and it talks about what is a subcontractor. So it's important to note here for the Dbe program, right? What might be defined as a subcontractor here may not rise to the level of a definition of a subcontractor pursuant to the 103D 302 requirement. So just be sure you understand the difference. For DBE purposes, right, a subcontractor is any participant that's performing work under the prime contract. Okay, not too difficult, right? And for purposes program, a lease is considered to be a contract. And what are manufacturers and suppliers? I'm sure if you've been bidding on federal projects with DOT, you already know what a manufacturer is and what a supplier is. So a manufacturer, they must operate a factory or an establishment that actually produces the materials or supplies. And if it's a DBE manufacturer, those materials are counted 100% towards your DBE participation. So you can count that value of their services, or their goods or products towards the DBE contract goal. Suppliers or regular dealers is a little bit different. So this is a definition of a regular dealer, and 60% of their goods may be counted towards the DBE goal. Any questions?
No questions in the chat.
Okay, thanks, Karen. I'm sure if you have bid on DOT projects, you have seen the confirmation by DBE form. Important to note, this form, confirmation and commitment agreement, both for subcontractor suppliers and manufacturers and trucking companies, has replaced that confirmation by DBE form, and it is due 5 days after bid opening. Please note, it's so important that if you are missing these forms, your bid shall be rejected. Okay. What this agreement does is it captures both the confirmation by the DBE that they've been asked for a quote and the amount of their quote, and the commitment by the bidder or offerer to that DBE. It also indicates the description of work, including the North American Industry Classification System codes, and then the dollar amount of the DBEs listed by bid item, and then the quantity and unit price. So one agreement per DBE, okay? So please note that, because the other form that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, it's one form for all your subcontractors, suppliers, manufacturers, and trucking companies. So for the confirmation and commitment agreement, it's one per DBE. As I mentioned earlier, there's another version of this form for trucking companies. And the reason why is because we asked what kinds of trucks are going to be used on the project, the number of trucks, an estimated start and end time that the trucking companies will be on site, also due 5 days after bid opening. Contract goal verification and good faith efforts. This form is for all your subcontractors, suppliers, trucking firms, whoever you are going to utilize on the project and for which you would like DBE credit. Notice though, we say, please list your non-DBE subs, suppliers, etc. And that is because the DOT, Office of Civil Rights, we collect data on the non-DBE companies that you work with on these projects. Also, this is where you're going to indicate whether they are or not a DBE. You're going to list the bid item number per the proposal, right? Or I guess the bid specs. You're going to list the bid item number and description, the quantity, unit price, and dollar amount. And on the bottom of the form, you'll calculate the DBE percentage. And you all know that the DBE percentage is calculated as follows. You're going to take the sum of all of the work items that's going to be performed by a DBE, and you divide that by the sum of all work items, less mobilization, force accounts, and allowance items.
Okay, I have a
Melanie,
question.
Kawai has
yeah.
a question.
Okay, regarding page 5 and 6 of the proposal.
Mm-hmm.
So on these forms, we list only subs and joint contractors that require licensing under Chapter 444 of Hawaii Revised Statutes, or that other thing of HAR, right?
Correct.
So are you saying that what's listed on here on these two forms and what's listed under the DBE forms can be different?
Yes. Yes. Are we gonna check to make sure that the companies listed on the DBE forms are on the proposal pages? For the Office of Civil Rights, for the DOT, we really are not going to be responsible for checking to see whether or not you've listed the subcontractors or joint contractors that are required to be listed. It's your responsibility. That's all I have to say about that. As well as if you want DBE credit for the subcontractors and joint contractors that may be DBE, list them on this form, this contract goal verification form.
The contract goal verification form is not P5 and P6 though.
No, it's for two separate and distinct purposes. And that's where we've had issues with the listing because the two requirements were conflated and it was on pages P5 and P6. And what we did here, we strive to do here is to separate the two requirements so that it's unambiguous and it's clear to the bidders. What we're trying to do is make it easier on our bidders to understand our requirements and why we're doing so. Does that make sense? Is that anybody like nodding off already because you can't tell? Anyway, so thank you for that. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
This document also requires that you document your good faith efforts 5 days after bid opening, and the good faith efforts portion of this form starts on page 2, which we'll see in a minute. This is due 5 days after bid opening. Bids that do not contain this form shall be rejected. What are good faith efforts? Good faith efforts or demonstration of such are due 5 days after bid opening as a matter of responsibility. And also, whenever you are awarded a contract and for whatever reason, you need to replace a DBE after award, you must demonstrate good faith efforts to replace that DBE with another DBE to ensure that you are meeting the contract goal. Okay, so.
Hi, Melanie. We have a question from Dve Fong. At the time of the bid, it's oftentimes difficult to know the exact suppliers and amounts for each supplier. If we're not going to use a supplier/manufacturers for DBE participation, can we leave those out without penalty?
If they are non-DBE and you're not wanting DBE credit for it, then I don't see why you must list it on the contract goal verification form. We use that data for our disparity study. And more importantly, though, we use that to count the DBE participation and calculate the contract goal. So, long story, but the answer is if they're a non-DBE and so you don't necessarily need to list them. We would like you to list them. But if they are a DBE and you want to get credit for them, you must list them on this contract goal verification and good faith efforts form.
Thank you.
So as I was saying, there are two times or two periods throughout the course of a project where good faith efforts must be demonstrated. One is 5 days after bid opening and responsibility, and also when you already awarded the contract and you would like to replace a DBE. Or even really important is that say there is a change and for whatever reason, the DBE's scope of work has decreased. And that means your DBE participation will decrease. We consider that a partial termination, and good faith efforts must be made in order for you to meet your DBE obligation. Okay. I'm wanting to go over the administrative reconsideration process as well for good faith efforts, because like I said, right, if you submit a bid and you didn't meet the goal and you didn't demonstrate good faith efforts, then your bid will be rejected. You, as the bidder, can request an administrative reconsideration, and at that time, there will be an administrative reconsideration official that will sit down with you, meet with you, and you can, for lack of a better term, plead your case. After that determination is made, if you are still not satisfied with that, then you can appeal pursuant to 103D 309. So contract compliance is our online tracking system, and the official name is Certification and Contract Compliance Management System, which is an online software program where we not only track the payments from the prime contractor to all of its subcontractors, but this is the portal that we use for certification and applications, as well as certification management. What I want to point out here is that the prompt payment requirement is monitored through this system, and how it works is quite simple. For any particular audit month, say we're sitting in May, so come June 1st, the system will send out an email to the prime contractor on a particular project, and it will say, okay, so did you receive payments for the month before? So did you receive payments in the month of May? If you did receive payments, then you would acknowledge it here, you would report it here, you would report any payments to your subcontractors for that progress payment, right? So you're gonna list your subcontractors that you paid and what you paid them. The subcontractor will then go into the system and acknowledge receipt of that payment, verify or validate that that's the amount they got paid. And if there are any disputes, then the subcontractor and prime contractor will try to work it out amongst themselves. But if they cannot, then the subcontractor can call the Office of Civil Rights, and we can kind of like work things through, or the project manager, and work and iron things out. So this is just a graphic of the audit process and the audit cycle. Does anybody have any questions about this before we go on to the forms?
Yes, we have a question from Jackson Cheng. How much info do the subs need to have at time of bid in regards to DBE suppliers and their subs? And after that, I have another question.
How much information?
Yes, how much information do the subs need to have at the time of bid in regards to DBE suppliers and their subs? And that may be in relationship to the previous question about not knowing until later on down the line that they will need to use certain suppliers and their subs. Difficult to know the exact suppliers and amounts for each supplier at the time of bid.
Okay. The operative words here is the time of bid, right? Are you saying time of bid or 5 days after bid opening? Because if it's 5 days after bid opening, the confirmation and commitment agreement for the supplier is due. You are to list the amount that you're committing that supplier to, and we will monitor that amount throughout the course of the project. Anything above it that you might procure will not be counted towards your DBE credit if you're awarded the contract, but we at DOT that participation as race neutral, and it'll go count towards our overall goal. So say, for example, you have a DBE supplier and they're going to supply you with $100,000 worth of products, and you commit that $100,000 at the time, 5 days after bid opening, but in actuality, you actually bought $150,000 worth of product. That $100,000 will be credited towards the contract goal, and then the $50,000 will be counted towards our overall DBE participation goal that we report to FHWA as race neutral participation. Yes, it's hard. I think what you need to do is make your best guess, because we will hold you to that commitment. What we don't want to see is suppliers be committed to an amount and not get paid that amount during the course of the contract.
Okay. And then we have a question by Dbe. Does this process replace the previous forms that we were required to submit with our progress payment applications?
Exactly. Before November 2017, the DBE participation report and prompt payment certification paper copies were to be accompanied by the progress payment in order for you to get paid. Now, after November 2017, federal aid projects, all of the contract information is uploaded to this online tracking system, and here is where we will monitor for prompt payment. And by the way, we will be asking for canceled checks, perhaps bank statements, to make sure that the DBEs have been paid.
Okay, thank you. We have another question, but Bridget's asking a question with regards to a trucking question. Question in regards to this portion: if the contractor making rules from their own rules, mainly for truckers, regarding travel time, since there is usually no written contracts for hauling, how can this be resolved? And if we need further clarification, she doesn't mind, speaking in person. So I'm not too sure. Melanie, is that question? Do you understand the question?
We can talk offline about that.
Okay.
I think that there should be an agreement, whether or not it's a formal contract or an agreement. There really should be an agreement as to how much you're going to get paid for what you're going to do, whether you're going to count from the time you leave your base yard or the leave the quarry. That all should be documented in some formal agreement. You shouldn't have like an informal, like, oh yeah, I'm gonna pay you this rate and that be it. I mean, that's where trucking companies get into trouble. So you need to have an agreement. And if you don't have an agreement, require one, I say, demand one.
She's sharing that this is mainly for paving and travel time. PUC rates say that it's base leave to base return.
Okay, so if that's the case, then you make sure that that's your understanding with the prime.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you for holding on to it for so long. Yeah, I dropped it off.
You may want to mute yourself. Okay, so anyway, that's what I have to say. There are different rules. I understand a few years ago, a memo came out from Department of Labor about paving and trucking companies and all of that. I'm not going to get into the specifics, but just know what's required and write your agreement accordingly. That's all I have to say about that. Know what you need to do, know what your rights are, what you deserve to be paid. I'm talking to the trucking companies, okay? So anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Any other questions, Karen?
No additional questions in the chat.
Mel, can I mention something about the online tracking system?
Oh, please do. This is Dan Williams. He's the Dbe Program Supervisor. He'll answer any questions you might have. Go ahead.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. And so I just wanted to just let you know, as far as the online tracking system goes, what happens in order for us to be able to get the project, what we call is to create a contract record, is I'll be sending out some requests for information to the different primes that have won the award for the project. And we're asking for information regarding the prime and all the subs and the second tier subs. So the sooner you can get that information back to us and as accurately as possible, that will help us get the project up on to the online system so we can get the contract record created. I do know oftentimes that it does take a while to make sure everybody knows the exact award date and when they're going to start, things of that nature. But just FYI, I will be sending out information to the primes that we are aware that have won the bid for the project, and we will be asking for information so we can create a contract record. As you navigate through the system, what we try to do is we try to make sure the letters that are system generated and sent out to you also have specific instructions and directions of where you can go to get more training opportunities or to watch informational videos regarding this. But you can always give us a call or give me an email, shoot me an email, and we can, walk through that as needed. So I just kind of wanted to let everybody know, please be aware that we will be requesting information regarding the prime, any subs they have, and even second or third tier subs. And also if there is a construction management firm on the project, we'll need that information, because what we're trying to do is, like Mel said, is use this system to capture as much and accurate data as we can, because we use it for our disparity study. We use it internally to monitor programs and projects, to monitor projects. So that kind of information is extremely important to us. And the quicker we can get it back from the primes, the quicker we can create the contract record. Thanks, Mel.
Thank you, Don. This is the Dbe Requirements Document, and this is where the confirmation and commitment agreement form is referenced. Notice it is due 5 days after bid opening. Also, the Dbe contract goal verification and good faith efforts documentation. Failure to provide these forms 5 days after bid opening shall result in your bid being rejected. What are days? If you notice down here, okay, so days are 5 calendar days starting from the day after the bids open. And if the last day falls on, or the 5th day falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday, then the forms will be due the next day that is not a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday. I didn't make up that definition. That's pursuant to the DBE regulations. So anyway, just wanted to point that out to you. Here's where the DBE goal is calculated, and the language on how the DBE goal is calculated. Notice here that we added in the DBE credit will not be given for mobilization, force account items, or allowance. Why? Because these are not definitive numbers, right? These are not definitive items. And if you want DBE credit for these items, say you might want to use a DBE for these items, that's fine. You can give the work to them, but we're not going to count it, and it's not countable towards your DBE goal. I know that that's come up in questions in the RFI before. So just know that it doesn't count towards your DBE goal. Okay, and also, please, if you inadvertently utilize more DBEs than was required to meet the goal, say the goal was 7% and you came in at 22%, then we will hold you to that 22%. So please be careful when you set when you calculate your DBE goal percentage. Any questions about that? Okay, moving on then. This is how to count the DBE participation towards your goal. This is not new. Joint checks and how we, that the joint check should be consistent with standard industry practices, and that's not new either. Okay, so here is where we're talking about good faith efforts. It is the bidder's responsibility to document good faith efforts and to submit their good faith efforts 5 days after bid opening.
We have a question from Cole. Do we need to list DBE for FA work even if the amount contributed to the goal is 0?
Do you have to list the DBE?
Yes, that's a question.
I wouldn't list the DBE in the DBE form because we're not going to count it. So what I'm trying to say is, please utilize them if you think you're going to use them, with the understanding to the and to communicate to the DBE that this is a forced account item. So I may not use you, but if you would like to, I'm going to, I'm going to put your name down, but that's not going to count towards DBE credit. We're not going to count that towards your DBE goal. So remember when I talked about the administrative reconsideration process? Here is the language about what to do if the department determined you have not met your good faith efforts requirement. You haven't demonstrated good faith efforts. It tells you who you can request that reconsideration with, and it gives you the process. So please, after I give you the form, be sure to read that carefully.
We have a question from Dve. If we're able to meet the DBE participation goal, are good faith effort documents still required to be submitted?
Yes. Yes, and the reason why, Javette, and for all of you out there, is because the bidders sometimes, they think they met the goal and they submit all of their forms and they didn't meet the goal. And then their good faith efforts documentation is required, but it's already been 5 days. So to prevent that, submit your documents with that form. Even if you think you met the goal. Okay, and here's where we talk about replacement of a DBE after the contract award and your obligation to meet good faith efforts. I guess, just to add on like what I said about the good faith efforts. 5 days after bid opening, that contract goal verification and good faith efforts document is due, as well as all of your good faith efforts. And the reason is because we want to ensure that that good faith efforts that was made, because meeting the goal is also good faith efforts. Yeah, so meeting the goal is also good faith efforts. So we want to see the efforts you made to meet your goal. So that's all I want to say about that.
We have Sam, to confirm, bid will be rejected if good faith effort document is not submitted for each bid with a DBE goal.
Let's just say this, Sam. That good faith effort documentation and contract goal verification and good faith effort documentation form is due 5 days after bid opening. Failure to submit that form is grounds for bid rejection. That's all I have to say. Okay?
And then David is following. Has a GC ever been awarded a project that didn't make the DBE goal after submitting a satisfactory good faith effort package?
Dan Williams, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, we've had 1 or 2 awards where the bidder didn't meet the goal, but their good faith efforts were satisfied. So that has happened. However, the best thing to do is really try your best to make sure you meet the goal. But that has happened in the past.
Thank you.
Melanie, we have Jason. On the DBE confirmation and commitment forms, there's a space for the bid item and unit of measure. If the bid item measurement is in, say, tons or cubic yards, but a trucker is usually measured per hour, how should the contractor list the unit amount for the trucking portion of the work?
For unit, I would put the hourly rate. That's why we put unit price or rate. So we put hours and then the rate per hour. That's what I would do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so this is the section where the online payment tracking system is mentioned. Payment didn't change, records didn't change. I wanted to point this. So failure to meet any of the DBE requirements will result in penalties. And here's where we're listing the penalties. So, okay. Okay, so I'm not going to go over the form line by line because you guys are astute bidders. Just wanted to point out here. This is the trucking company one? Yeah, okay. This is what the trucking company form looks like. Please note that if the trucking company is going to perform work under contractor and not the prime contractor, then that subcontractor needs to sign off on this form. So in other words, the DBE trucking company is going to be a second tier. The first tier subcontractor must sign off on this form. And oh, here, do you guys see the date on the bottom right-hand corner? Be sure that when you see this form, it's the one that's dated 5/20. There's some earlier versions. The agreement will have a set of instructions on how to complete the form. I think it'll be in the back of the agreement form, so just check your bid package. It's the second page. Okay, and then this is the DBE commitment and agreement for the subcontractor, manufacturer, and supplier. Do you guys have any questions about this? It's pretty straightforward, right? I mean, because this is just like the bid, right? Again, if the supplier or manufacturer is going to be performing work under another subcontractor and not directly with the prime, then that subcontractor at that first tier must sign off on this form. And this is just instructions.
Kawhi asked, what if you need more space? Where are we going to put this information?
Oh, just add. You can just add another page, but the signatures should all be on one page. But you can just add, you know, see
and
attached.
Sam has a question. Sam, would you like to chime in? Sam Ping.
Sam, you want to come off mute?
Is
Okay, let's move on. So here is where you're going to list all your suppliers, manufacturers, trucking companies. Whether or not they're a DBE or not, we would like to know, and yes or no, we would like the non-DBEs listed here too, like I mentioned before, and Dan mentioned, it's for the disparity study, right? The bid items and the quantity, the unit, and the dollar amount. And on the bottom, here is where you're going to calculate your goal. And then it's going to be signed by an authorized representative of the prime contractor. And here's where you're going to summarize your good faith efforts. Failure to provide required information for bid proposal rejection. And here's where we're going to ask you all of the questions, like did you submit all the required information 5 days after bid opening, right? You need to explain what you went through to solicit DBEs. And if, this is pretty important, if a non-DBE was selected over a DBE, then you must provide the quotes for all of them when a non-DBE was selected over a DBE.
There's a question, are only DBE suppliers, trucking companies required to submit these commitment forms? Not required by okay. Is it not required by non-DBE companies?
Correct. The confirmation and commitment agreement are is only for DBEs. So the agreement, confirmation and commitment agreement is only for DBEs. However, that contract goal verification and good faith efforts, that's for all your firms that you're going to subcontract, or your suppliers, manufacturers, and trucking companies. That's where you're going to list all of them. So the commitment agreement, that's one per DBE. You don't need them for non-DBEs.
And James is asking if you can please go over line 10 again.
James, you're killing me. Line 10 of what?
The form you were just talking about, if a non-DBE is selected over a DBE, does that mean we have to attach every quote that we get from every supplier?
If a non-DBE is selected over a DBE, then it's a subcontractor, yeah? If a non-DBE is selected, then you will submit all of your quotes. Because what we want to see is, was the DBE's price unreasonably high? And that's relative also and dependent on the project itself, Jason. We want to see like why that DBE was not selected. And if it's unreasonably high, their price, then we'll say, oh yeah, okay, no wonder he wasn't selected. No wonder Grace didn't select them.
But this only comes into play if we don't meet the goal, is that correct?
This is when we are evaluating good faith efforts. Remember now, good faith efforts means you met the goal, or if you haven't met the goal, that you demonstrated good faith efforts. So that's per the regulations. Good faith efforts means whether you met the goal or you demonstrated good faith efforts to meet the goal when it was not met.
Okay. We have two questions. You can go ahead, Jason.
As a follow, I mean, with some of this, you know, if a subcontractor has notes and exclusions, how are you going to evaluate that? You know, we might select a non-DBE because they cover something part and parcel, they do the entire thing. Whereas if you have a quote for something, you know, say, you know, concrete, installation of concrete, and one guy demoing the old stuff and hauling it away and regrading and installing the concrete, and another guy is just doing forming, pouring, and stripping of the concrete, and we have to dig out everything else. If you just look at the quotes as they are, the DBE guy might appear to be lower, but when you add all of that other stuff in, they're not lower. So how would you evaluate that? If we just submit a quote, you're going to say, oh, the DBE guy is lower, but you didn't list him.
I think that it would be incumbent upon the bidder to explain the reasoning behind the difference in the quote, just as you explained.
Yeah, and then Jason, also on line 10.
This is Curtis.
Yeah, Curtis.
Go ahead. No, I was saying on line 10, yeah. Go ahead, Curtis.
This is provide a detailed written explanation for each DBE detailing the reasons for not utilizing or allowing the DBE to participate in the contract. So you would submit the quotes, but you'd also provide that written explanation like you're talking about. That way that when the evaluation committee looks at the good faith efforts, they can consider all that in their evaluation.
Yeah, because it happened. I think I recall it wasn't so much a good faith effort evaluation, but it was a DBE sub that submitted a real different quote to two different bidders. And we were wondering why. And that DBE sub had to come in and explain, oh, I quoted this bidder for this work, but then I also do this work, so I quoted a higher price for this bidder number 2. So, I mean, as long as it can be explained, then it's acceptable. But explain, it's a red flag for the DOT. Does that make sense?
Okay. We have a similar question on this topic from David. What if a GC chooses to self-perform because it's more competitive rather than select the DBE?
That's the GC's choosing, right? That's the GC's choosing. I cannot force them to use a DBE if it affects their bottom line and they prefer to self-perform. I mean, we cannot force GCs to utilize DBEs. All we can do is make our best effort to set a contract goal that's reasonable enough and where a DBE or a few DBEs can participate. But I guess maybe that question is being asked because what if a DBE can perform it, but the GC prefers to perform it? Well, I mean, that's something that would be evaluated. Again, it depends on the situation.
He's saying, how do we show this in the good faith effort document?
You just explain it. Just explain it.
Mhm. And then we have another question from Bridget. Could a DBE trucker sub out to a non-DBE trucker and still have that percentage count towards the prime's DBE goal if the non-DBE truckers that has been subbed bill does that billing to the prime, or for that to count, would they have to bill to the DBE trucker and in turn they invoice the prime?
I really can't answer how the trucking companies should invoice the prime. All I can speak to, Bridget, is how we count participation by DBE truckers. And that would be, we count up to the total value of the trucks utilized by the DBE by non-DBEs. Like I mentioned, I don't know if it was in this morning's training, if the DBE has 5 trucks and they're gonna lease trucks from 5 non-DBEs, then the prime can count 10 trucks towards DBE participation. It can count up to the value of the DBE truck. Anything in addition to that 10 trucks, only the commission and fees for the additional trucks can be counted.
Okay. And then we have a question from Jackson. So if you list the non-DBE subs on the sub listing at bid, how would the DOT know who else provided pricing?
Can you repeat that question, please?
Yeah. So if you list non-DBE subs on the sub listing at bid, how would the DOT know who else provided pricing? From Jackson.
If you list non-DBE subs on the bid, then that's, I mean, okay, again, operative word is on the bid. We're asking you to submit this information 5 days after bid opening, right? So if you don't list them, then we wouldn't ask you to submit the quotes.
Okay. Dve Fong asked, are there or is there a definitive requirement, like a rubric, that we can follow to ensure that we meet the good faith effort requirements?
I would refer to the DBE requirements language of it under that section of demonstration of good faith efforts and read what constitutes good faith efforts. Also in the DBE regulations in Appendix A, the regulations speak to what good faith efforts are or what constitutes good faith efforts. I realize, GCA members, that at times it may seem like evaluation of good faith efforts might be a subjective thing, but really the regulations are pretty specific on what the DOT should consider as good faith or good faith efforts. And I think I know what that previous question was about. Like, he's probably asking about that question 10 that Jason asked about, like, if it is a non-DBE, right? If it's a non-DBE, but there were like DBEs that were too high, how would we know? I guess to tell you the truth, we probably wouldn't know.
Okay. Let's see. We have a question from Sam. May we use ... as an ellipsis under item description in the commitment forms? Or would you like the entire item description listed?
As long as I believe we can reference that item with what's in the specs, then we'll be okay.
And then a question from Jason. How should a first tier sub that utilizes a trucker be listed by a prime contractor? Doesn't the agreement need to be between trucker and prime?
That agreement is between trucker and prime.
From Sam, under the NICS code and secondary NICS code on the commitment forms, it is only the code for the work to be performed for this project.
Correct. Any more questions, Karen?
No, so far no additional questions into the chat.
This is Lizzie from Glover.
Yes.
If the DBE trucker owns 10 trucks and they are subcontracting to another DBE trucker that owns 2 trucks, and then they are subcontracting to non-DBEs, do they match the 12 trucks of DBEs or the 10 trucks they own themselves?
I believe it's the 10 trucks they own themselves.
So even though all 12 trucks are DBE, it's only the 10 trucks they own themselves?
Trucking is so complicated, Lizzie, so I think it is, you're right. It's up to the value of DBE trucks working on the project. I can double check that, but it's up to the value of DBE trucks working on the projects.
Okay, thank you.
Curtis or Dan, would you happen to know that off the top of your head?
I'm gonna look it
No,
up real
not off
quick.
the top of my head.
All I know is that the regs say you can count up to the value of DBE trucks that are working on the project. So if there's 12 trucks on the project, I'm gonna like go out on the limb and say 12 additional trucks can be counted because that's up to the value of the DBE truck. And then if there are additional trucks and the DBE is using their drivers, then you can count the truck as well.
Melanie, can you pull up the trucking form? Because someone has questions with regards to it. Sam, under the NICS code and secondary NICS code on the commitment forms, is it only the code for the work to be performed by the project? And you answered yes. And then a follow-up was, so can you leave the secondary code blank even if the DBE has a secondary code in your system?
That's fine. That
Regarding,
is fine.
okay, regarding item 1, 2, and 3 on the trucking commitment form, is this specific to the trucking company filling out the form or for the entire project?
This is for the trucking company. This is for the trucking company that's committed by the prime, the bidder. Oops.
So it's one company instead of all the companies?
Yeah, this is one. Shoot. It's one form per trucking company.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So it's
And
one
then-
form per trucking company.
And then Carlene mentioned the value and the commitment. That was the comment.
Yes, so I'm not sure if that's a comment, that the commitment here, right, under the amount is what we are going to hold the prime contractor to.
And then Sam asked, does each sub-tier DBE trucking company submit a commitment form? Sub-tier.
I don't believe they must, because at that point, this point in time, right? I don't know if that would be known, right? So if it's known and if they're a DBE, then they would, yeah, they would submit this form.
I think Sam was kind of asking the same question as I was. Sorry, this is Bridget. Where it's basically saying if a sub trucking company subs out another trucking company, that's DBE. In order for that to count towards their DBE total, would each company that is a DBE have to be listed and complete a form like this in order for that, excuse me, in order for that person's percentage to match? I understanding that right, Sam?
I think the important thing to note here is that whatever the DBE is committed to doing, whether or not they are going to use additional DBEs, that additional DBE may not be known at the time of this form is due. So they may not necessarily submit an agreement because it would be like after the contract is awarded. So we may not have to be honest, we may not have a form for that unknown second or third tier DBE company.
Okay.
So in other states, and this is something that we may look into in the future, is after the contract is awarded, then there is a trucking utilization form. I think T has it, and that's where the contractor would list all of their trucking companies and the number of trucks, type of trucks, etc. And that's something that DOT may consider in the future, just because of all of these questions that are coming up.
Mhm. And then Jason is asking if a trucking company has, say, 10 trucks available, but the bid item only requires the use of 6 trucks. Do we list the entire capability of the trucking company or just the anticipated number of trucks to be used?
I'm not really sure I understand Jason's question. I would say if you're looking at the project and you anticipate that 6 trucks, you're going to use 6 trucks, then I would commit those 6 trucks and not more than that. And if you do utilize more than that, then great, we can count, if they're BBEs, we can count that towards our race neutral participation. I don't know, Jason, if that answers your question.
Mhm. And then Sam stated, due to the time limit to gather the signatures, not all signatures will be original. Would that be acceptable in the long run? Would you accept like electronic signatures, Melanie?
In this day and age, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say, with everything being DocuSigned, e-signed, I can't really answer that question because I didn't we really talk about whether it had to be wet signatures. Really, what we're trying to do is just to protect the integrity of this DBE program, to make sure that those signatures are authentic. And if we can authenticate your signatures, and if it's not wet, but we can authenticate it, then we will accept it. Does that make sense?
Hey, Melanie, this is Sandy.
Yes, Sandy.
If they can attach the audit trail for an electronic signature, that would suffice.
Thank you for coming to my rescue. I am perspiring over here. God.
Yeah, electronic signature is recognized as an approved signature with the audit trail.
Okay. Dve has a question. Would documents submitted to comply with DBE requirements be public record? Previously, we have requested that the information be kept confidential as it could contain trade secrets.
Dve, any information that has, any document that has financial information on it, they are proprietary.
Okay, thank you.
And Curtis was able to
Yeah.
put some language from the regs regarding the trucking question in the chat. So go ahead and take a look at that when you get an opportunity.
And some people don't have access to the chat. Do you want us to read it, Melanie?
Please.
Okay. This is copied from the DBE regs. Okay, it's like, for example, DBE firm X uses 2 of his own trucks on a contract. It leases 2 trucks from DBE firm Y and 6 trucks equipped with drivers from a non-DBE firm Z. DBE credit would be awarded for the total value of transportation services provided by firm X and firm Y, and may also be awarded for the total value of transportation services provided by 4 of the 6 provided by firm Z. In all, full credit would be allowed to the participation of 8 trucks. DBE credit could be awarded only for the fees or commissions pertaining to the remaining trucks firm X receives as a result of the lease with firm Z.
So that answers that question, then yes, you can count the additional 2 trucks. So it'd be 12 trucks total. That would be the value of the DBE trucking company. And then you can use 12 others.
And Jason asked, do these forms need to be submitted as originals, or is email to the appropriate state project manager acceptable?
I believe it's email. I'm not sure how you've been getting your confirmation by DBEs to the project manager. So whichever way you've been providing that information is sufficient.
And Dve has, she just, guess making a comment. We were previously allowed to submit email copies of the DBE forms, which was
Okay.
very helpful for Outer
Okay.
Island folks.
Okay, Dve, that's fine. That's fine.
And Dve
Wow.
said thank you, and so did Bridget.
Wow. I did not anticipate this going for an hour and 15 minutes. And like
We
I
have
said, I'm like
thinkers, they're
perspiring.
thinking
I
people.
know. I'm perspiring here, man. I was in the hot seat. Oh boy. I guess that's it. I'm gonna stop the recording.
Oh, here's Bridget. Sorry